Hello and good day to you wherever you happen to be in the world. I'm Deborah Young, the CEO of the RegTech Association. As many of you would know, we're a non-profit industry association committed to accelerating the adoption of RegTech and creating a global centre of excellence. I will be your MC for the next 2 hours as we traverse many topics, including financial inclusion, understanding the RegTech ecosystem with a macro lens. We're going to get a little bit more focused as we talk about impacts on people and planet, regulatory innovation, and the all-important acceleration of adoption of RegTech. In a post-pandemic environment, RegTech has thrived, according to our annual research, which showed record capital raisings, with 61% of our RegTech founders having attracted professional capital. The time taken from first conversation to full deployment reduced to 9.3 months from 13 months over the past 3 years. We also now have a much clearer perspective on buyer behaviour, including that we are seeing consumer and customer demand entering the top drivers for RegTech adoption. We're also seeing regulators elevate RegTech and SupTech as critical innovation pathways. I think it's fair to say that RegTech is now well understood thanks to the concerted efforts of our association, our strategic partners, and our engaged members worldwide. But while the pandemic may be over, systemic stability is still top of mind, as is privacy, data protection, but also financial inclusion, climate, sustainability, and the need for regulatory innovation is paramount. And then there's the new kid on the block, generative AI and its disruptive characteristics. What can you expect over the next 2 hours? We'll see global and emerging leaders, including RegTechs and our strategic partners, who are charged with bringing our theory to life and underlining the importance of our global centre of excellence and being for industry by industry. The sessions are being recorded today, and everyone on this call will receive a copy. Our special call out to our moderators: please do not go over time. If you can stick to your allocated time, and if you get to see my face come up on screen, you know you're about to get booted off, so thank you for that. And we are very much live, so anything could happen. Because of the rapid fire of the event, we may not be able to get to all the Q&A, but I would encourage you to use the Q&A function that is on the system. Do post your questions and we will try to get to them. And even if we are unable to get to them, we hope to use those questions to fuel the work of the RegTech Association going forward. What we will do is punctuate the next 2 hours with a short break in the middle. We're going to play a 30-second video by one of our sponsors, and we'll also pop a poll up on their quality poll, and we'd be obliged if you could fill that in and let us know what you think. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Microsoft, our platinum partners, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, who are our gold sponsor, and Investment New South Wales in particular, and the many other sponsors on the show reel who have supported us for this event. It surely does take a village. Today, we've had 750 registrations to this online event from 49 countries, which augment the 17,500 people who've joined our program since 2020. So for now, why don't you sit back, relax, and let's get underway. It is now my greatest pleasure to introduce our keynote, our speaker, Anna Wallace. Anna and I met online a few years ago as I was directed to her when having global conversations around financial inclusion. I was most interested to learn that RegTech is a focus area for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so we're very pleased to have Anna here with us this evening. Her role at the Gates Foundation is to leverage technology to enable financial regulators in managing the risks posed by emerging financial services models without impeding the innovation required to drive financial inclusion. Anna has 20 years' experience in public policy with expertise in financial regulation, digital financial services, and consumer protection. And many of you will recall Anna from her Financial Conduct Authority days. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Anna. Thanks, Anna.
Hi, can you hear me, Deborah? Oh, she's gone already. Okay, well, I'm absolutely delighted to be part of Accelerate RegTech 2023. And I want to thank Deborah first for that very kind introduction. But Deborah, Alison, Hong, and the whole RegTech Association team really for pulling together another fantastic event this year and for building such an incredible community. I really don't know anyone else who's able to do this. And Deborah, you set out in your intro the impacts that you'd had and set out in your research report last year. And I just kind of wanted to echo how blown away I was by the impact that your efforts are having on the adoption of RegTech. And just to call out, we definitely need more of this more broadly around the globe. So today I want to kick off the 2 hours that we have together with a question. And it's the same question I had last year, but we're going to discuss slightly different things and move the discussion on. I want to ask, how can we develop RegTech that supports inclusive, consumer-centered financial systems? Same question. And I want to give you today a bit of a flavour of the challenges or opportunities around this problem statement for emerging markets. Now, last year, when I spoke about this, I wanted to inspire you as an innovation community on this next phase of regulatory innovation. So what do I want to do this year? Well, I definitely still want to inspire you as an innovation community, and I still want you to think about regulatory innovation. But I also want to give you some insight into some of the practical examples of how you can engage in some of these emerging ecosystems. And hopefully you're going to see some progress in moving from only really having a problem statement and a conceptual set of opportunities to some real opportunities for you as an industry. So just to start with some context, Deborah introduced me in my role, but really just to give you a snapshot of where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation come from. So for us, digital technologies are an essential part for economic growth and development. In emerging markets, the proliferation of telecoms, payment, and identity technologies have helped account ownership at a regulated entity. This is a very technical term for me as an ex-regulator, but those institutions that are formally regulated, it's increased by 50% in 10 years, spanning 2011 to 2021. So that's 51% of adults in 2011 were included in formal financial services. And last year, 2021, when the research was done, that moved up to 76%. A phenomenal statistic in my mind. Digital financial services, or DFS as we call them, is providing a convenient and safe method for consumers to make payments, transfer money, and access services such as credit, savings, and insurance. Things that we take for granted, right? But completely new to this 50% number that I spoke about. And this widespread digital financial inclusion has helped build economic resilience, economic security, and most importantly, reducing poverty for individuals and households, the most vulnerable in our world. Now, we set ourselves a target that by 2013, the Bill and Melinda Gates aspired to see 80% of adults worldwide included in the financial system through DFS. Now, we're hoping we will reach that number well before that. My lights have gone out. 2 seconds. Live TV. Sorry about that. And so we are looking not just at that access number, but also the usage. What are governments looking at? Well, governments of emerging markets are looking to use the lessons from the pandemic, which really saw an acceleration in digital financial services to help build back inclusive, consumer-centered financial systems. So I think you're going to expect from the governments and also from agencies like the UN and the World Bank, serious backing of this strategy to help build resilient economies. So let's go back to the challenges that we have around that. Well, at the consumer level, and for us that are involved or have been involved in regulation, we've got 50% new users to formal financial services, with all the vulnerabilities that those individuals bring. Obviously, the advantages are great, the ones that I spoke about in terms of resilience, but these individuals are exposed to fraud and poor conduct. Secondly, at the provider level, with more market participants, it becomes increasingly more difficult to solve problems by, getting people around the table. And many participants are going to be new, right? So as much as the users are new, the firms are new as well. How can regulators, and do they have the resources to really support them in this journey? And lastly, the use of mobile and digital technologies, we know, bring novel risks, and then the disruption of the financial system by mobile operators and big tech brings more complex regulatory landscape in terms of who's regulated and who isn't. And so to meet this challenge, really, we need to bring together the policy objectives of financial inclusion, the policy objectives of consumer protection, and the aim of digital transformation of regulation. And these don't always work together. And I spoke about this the last time. Often they're working in very different ways. Financial inclusion seeks to get as many individuals into the system as possible. But the basic consumer protection frameworks have been put in place aren't necessarily working for this new population. And I'll talk a bit about that later. Financial consumer protection is a framework of laws and regulation designed to ensure fair and responsible treatment, but it's not always the best friend of innovation, as we know, and it can be really expensive. It can stall the growth of markets, and this is just too heavy a price to pay in emerging markets where financial inclusion is so fragile, and the margins for those providing these mobile money operators is so small. And in terms of digitization of regulatory processes, well, this is where we've seen a lot of change actually in the last year. Really, a lot of that focus hasn't been on the problem statements of low-income households, and it's really been on more complex regulatory requirements. And so for me, the opportunity is how to bring these three objectives together and really think about how RegTech and SupTech can be at the heart of that, and not just as a means of implementation. Now, on the problem statement, I told you last year, and we really went into more detail on what the issues were for low-income households and what the drivers of those were. And that really was my way of trying to get the technology industry excited about these problems, because they're really, really complex issues. And really the work that we've done in the last year really underlines these being problems in most of the low-income markets that we've looked at. These are fraud, data security, lack of understanding and transparency on costs and charges, and poor consumer redress. And we see, obviously, addressing these issues as addressing the harm to individuals and households. But there's also an area of addressing trust. In India alone, 50% of people who are not engaging in digital financial services cite trust as a major issue. And we think that consumer protection can really address some of that. And it's not just about getting access to the services, it's also the trust in deepening your usage of the services that we really see an opportunity. So what is the opportunity? Well, I'm going to focus on the SupTech side of it, the supervisory technology and the use of technology by regulators. Now, this isn't new, and you're going to have lots of people talking about it, and hey, you're the experts. But, at that regulatory side, it's really been talked at an international level since 2017. In 2018, so not really long after, a new generation emerged in emerging markets led by leaders like the Central Bank of Philippines. So where are we today? Well, in a survey of 146 country authorities, financial authorities, Cambridge University's Centre for Alternative Finance identified 3 trends. Okay, so there's a broad acceptance of SupTech. So most regulators have engaged in it. It is still at a nascent stage and there is room for growth, but we've got 71 the survey indicates 71% of regulators are rising to the challenge and see an increased adoption of that, including with strategies and roadmaps and pathways to that adoption. But it is still in experimentation phase, right? It's still nascent, and there's a lot of, they're still at early stages in terms of embedding that into their architecture and at the experimentation phase. The great news for me is that most of the use cases are around consumer protection and prudential supervision. That wasn't the case last year. Last year, really prudential was a significantly, or anti-money laundering would have been where the noise is. So I'm really pleased that the problems that we identified are becoming both accepted by regulators, that they need to take more action, and that there is movement in the technology world. And I believe by working with partners like the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance, the RegTech Association, as I say, the creation of the ecosystem you guys have done has been phenomenal. Joanne Barefoot and the Alliance of Innovative Regulation, FinReg Lab and Dwara Research are just few that I wanted to call out to you as real key players that are going to be building these ecosystems. And you're going to see much more opportunities for tech sprints, grand challenges, and RFPs in the coming years. So I hope you can see momentum. The problem statement's still there. I think that's quite good for building technology. This is a scalable prospect. It's similar in most of the markets we've been looking at. And that really we're seeing the demand side from the regulators really build momentum. And that SupTech really is being seen by all the players in the ecosystem as being at the heart of promoting consumer-centered financial systems. And with this great opportunity to develop solutions that improve significantly the lives of low-income households and women across the globe. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Anna. There was a couple of takeouts for me from Anna. One is just the reminder that financial inclusion is indeed fragile. There's serious backing to build sustainable economies, so that is an opportunity. And we always say that RegTech can build in that layer of trust to give consumers confidence. And then finally, part of our role is how can we shift from this, stage of experimentation to actually doing it for real. So thank you very much to Anna. It is now my great pleasure to invite a number of people to the stage, and I will introduce them one at a time and then let them get underway. The first person I'd like to introduce you to is Peter Deans. Peter Deans is a former Chief Risk Officer and retired from executive life in 2019, although he's a very, very busy man for somebody that's retired. He had a long career in finance for over 30 years, and Peter is today an industry-leading risk management and strategy advisor through his firm, Notwithoutrisk Consulting. He's also a non-executive director of an equity trading platform called Trade for Good, and he's also a non-executive director at the RegTech Association, so we know each other quite well. And he's an advisory board member for a number of startup companies. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Thank you, Deborah.
I'd love to introduce you to Helen Packard. Helen has over 20 years' experience delivering regulatory change in industry and regulators. She led the RegTech and Emerging Technologies major programs at the Bank of England. And until recently, she was also the Europe chair for the Bank for International Settlements RegTech and SupTech network. Helen has recently joined the Financial Conduct Authority and leads their data strategy office. Welcome to you, Helen. Next person is Connie Leung, also someone we know very well. Connie is responsible for driving thought leadership and high-level engagements with key stakeholders in the financial services industry across Asia Pacific for Microsoft. She's also part of Microsoft's worldwide financial services group, where she provides strategic direction and leadership across all aspects of the financial services sector, including banking, capital markets, and insurance. Welcome to you, Connie. And last but not least, Benedict Nolans. Benedict is the head of the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub Hong Kong Centre. Prior to this appointment, she was a managing director at SC Ventures, the innovation arm of Standard Chartered Bank that leads a series of new ventures across digital banking, banking as a service, SME finance and blockchain. Welcome to you, Benedict. I'm now going to hand over to Peter, who's going to convene our panel, RegTech Around the World.
Thank you, Deborah, and good evening to everyone in the Asian region or Asia Pacific region. Good afternoon to those in Europe, and I'm sure we've got some people on the east coast of the US waking up. So good morning there. RegTech Around the World, an aptly named title for the conference tonight, and it's really reflective, I think, of this extraordinary period that the RegTech industry's been through over the last 5 or 6 years. I think Anna mentioned earlier the research that the association did last year. I just saw some research a little while back that I think was posted on our website that said that the industry globally is growing at compound annual growth rates of 20%. And most industries, apart from probably artificial intelligence, would kill to have a 20% growth rate. So fantastic times ahead of us. And I think just listening to both Deborah and Anna talk about the various pieces that make up the RegTech industry, what we now call the traditional areas of risk and compliance, identity management, AML, fraud, now being joined by financial inclusion, compliance with a very different lens about customer outcomes, as Anna talked about. And then, of course, we are moving, I think, rapidly into, a RegTech era where the broader sustainability meets a lot of the regulatory and compliance. I'm not going to say too much more because we've only got about 25 minutes before Deborah cuts us off, so I'm going to keep it nice and snappy, but delighted to be joined by Benedict, Helen and Connie. I might ask each of them just very briefly introduce themselves, their role, and I always like to say your interest in the topic as well. It's a bit like Mastermind. Benedict, I might start with you. Just a quick intro. I think we've got our first tech hiccup there. Benedict, can you hear me? She's lost there. Connie, over to you. Just a very quick intro from yourself, and as I said, your interest in the topic.
Thank you, Peter. Nice to be on the panel. Thank you for inviting me. I think as Deborah introduced, I'm part of the worldwide financial services industry team of Microsoft. I'm based out of Hong Kong. I cover Asia Pacific. For financial services, we actually cover banks, insurance, and capital markets. My interest in RegTech is really something I'm quite passionate about because we touch on regulators, we touch on customers, we touch on partners. And as Anna said, technology is really very important and crucial. You're also an equalizer. So I'm looking forward to our discussion and inspiring the rest of the community to help drive more RegTech adoption.
Thank you, Connie. And Microsoft's a very big supporter of the industry as well. Helen.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me. I think my interest in this area stems more from the subtech side, but very much keeping an eye on the RegTech world as it evolves in the last few years at the Bank of England, BIS, and obviously now at the FCA. But the particular angle for me that fascinates me is how data and technology is just enabling what we do in many different ways and the opportunities that it can deliver, and looking, underneath the bonnet at the data and technology, not necessarily at RegTech, but how data and technology can really enable the path for the future.
Thanks, Helen. We might just, we're waiting for Benedict to come back on, so hopefully she's not too far away. But Helen, I might just start with you. Maybe just talking about regulatory innovation. How do you describe regulatory innovation, and perhaps your insights and perspectives, having worked at a couple of regulators now, and perhaps give us some insights into the FCA's work they're doing.
Sure. So for at the bank and at the FCA, I think it's a very creative organization because things evolve, policies evolve, the way that we do work, the way that we introduce technology. So there's a lot of innovation that goes on that you may not naturally think a regulator is an innovation organization, but we have to innovate because financial services changes, and what can we do? So a really good example of how we change, and I'm going to pick up on two examples if that's okay, is what the Global Financial Innovation Network, GFIN. So this is a network, it's a global network launched in 2019 by 23 regulators. So it's 80 different international organizations that are involved. But the point of this is how we can be innovation orientated, right? How can we interact with different regulators? How can we push RegTech across these boundaries, across these borders? And over the past couple of years, we focused on, ESG, AI, and crypto. But, we just announced last week that we're going to be hosting the first global tech sprint, right? And this is going to be focusing on greenwashing. So it's a 3-month global event to bring about both international regulators, but also firms, right, and technology experts. What we're trying to do with this is have a collaborative conversation. So as much as it's run on a digital sandbox and, we're doing different testing on different platforms, the really important thing is as we bring in different conversations, right? We hear from different voices from around the world, from different perspectives, and that's absolutely critical to how we think about how we innovate, how we address these global issues such as, greenwashing, because it's just large, right, on a grand scale, and we need to collectively work together. And I think that's one good example. Another example of how we innovate at the FCA is try to think about, how people interact with us and what works for them. So, we're all very used to ordering food on the phone and somebody delivers it to you and it's really easy. But then sometimes, you've got to think about some organizations are really big and some organizations are really small that are financial services. So how do they interact with their regulator? How does that service work? People expect different ways to interact. So we just launched a really exciting new, it's sort of, we call it a digital front door, and I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, but this is something that it's a single point of entry to ask anything you want. So whether it's about a tool or a regulation or a waiver or how you do something, we've now created this ability for people to navigate a complex array of different tools, different requirements in a single way. And I think this is the point that, we have to, as regulators, evolve how we interact, right? How we use technology, how we have those conversations, but also make it quite tangible so that people can see the difference and see the change and be part of it, listening. So this is, kind of a general thing. We listen, we evolve, we adapt, and we introduce, and we keep on doing that at the FCA. I'll hand back to you, Peter. Thank you very much.
I wonder, just on that last point, instead of maybe asking Siri some of the regulatory questions, you might be asking Helen in the future, perhaps, or a AI generated version of Helen, which I'm sure won't be as good. Benedict, welcome back. Just a very brief introduction to yourself and interest in the topic, and then maybe we might get stuck into it and give us your global perspectives, from a regulatory perspective, and talk about the good work the BIS is doing in innovation.
Okay, so I hope you can hear me fine because
loud and clear.
Okay, so I don't know how many minutes I have because I suddenly saw some blackout when I had to do but anyway, so for context, I am running the Hong Kong Center of the BIS Innovation Hub, and we were set up 2.5 years ago with one of our focus areas being subtech. I would say we can do a lot more work on subtech though. So if you go on our BIS Innovation Hub website, you can see some of the projects that we've been doing in the subtech space, including also in the area of intersection with, for example, ESG and with the purpose of collecting data to avoid also these greenwashing situations and to enhance also bank supervision. So, but I would say from my perspective, and that's in the Hong Kong Center, I've been mostly focused on payments, and particularly on cross-border payments and cross-border CBDC. And within that context, one of the most recurring themes is the question around AML and CTF and sanctions compliance. And so maybe to inverse it, one of the reasons why cross-border payments are so costly and why they are so slow, one of the reasons there is indeed AML compliance and CTF and sanctions compliance. So the question really on my mind, I would say, is a lot of these technologies that are being used by, for example, correspondent banks, To what extent can there be greater industry collaboration around using these technologies to eliminate some of the duplication in these global cross-border payment chains? Now, I know that a lot of this is due to current regulation, including, for example, how we think about correspondent banks and correspondent bank due diligence, etc. And also is due to the viewpoint that the banks are responsible for identifying these kinds of issues. But I do want to incentivize this audience really to come to me, and whether you're a RegTech or whether you are a bank or whether you're a regulator, to come to me with ideas on what kind of innovation could happen and subject to which conditions. So, for example, one of my colleagues at the HKMA starts talking about policy innovation. So we're often talking here about technology innovation, but sometimes to achieve technology innovation, we may need either legal change or policy innovation, policy changes by regulators or by international organizations like FATF, for example. So I would be open to any ideations there that can help us in the direction of very solid AML, CTF, and sanctions compliance, but hopefully with lesser cost and, let's say, with higher speed in cross-border payments. And linking up with the topic that Anna Wallace set out at the beginning, cross-border payments and remittances is really vital to most migrants in the world, people who are working outside their market. So and also, for example, to SME transactions across the world. So any SME or any individual that has to wait or pays a lot on their transfer is also an inclusion issue. So in some, with this audience, I would bet there is a ton of AML, CTF, and expertise in this audience, more than I will ever gather in my brain. So anybody who has good ideas on what I set out is welcome to come to us.
Thanks, Benedict. It's a really interesting point you made around, I guess, some of the challenges with cross-border payments, and I link it back to this policy innovation. And I look at the rise of a lot of the fintechs and new payments businesses that have really grabbed hold of some of the RegTech solutions that the incumbents haven't been able to deliver, things like the digital identities. I mean, do you think that trend is still going to continue, where, I don't want to call it regulatory arbitrage, but I think some of the new players seem to be quicker to embrace RegTech solutions to sort of try and navigate their way around, what are seen as quite structural impediments to facilitating, innovation in payments, for example. Do you see RegTech continuing to really drive that?
Well, I would say my job prior to Standard Chartered, prior to the VIS was Standard Chartered, and prior to Standard Chartered was Circle, which is the company that is US coin. And what I realized during my time there is that the whole innovation around the use of digital onboarding, and specifically for individuals, but that thinking process has since also been extended to corporates, more slowly there though, because it's much more complex. But for individuals, all the facial recognition, the liveliness test, the fact that we can now onboard in less than a few minutes with digital banks is all actually the result of an innovation that came around in the crypto sector. So, and are that scaled in the crypto sector? Because the crypto sector was having millions of users from across the globe, and it needed these technologies to be able to do at least basic KYC. So sometimes I think we may be critical of things like the crypto sector, but for these kind of tools, they really were developed and scaled within the crypto sector and then applied, for example, to digital banks. So in my time in Standard Chartered, we started using the exact same tool for the Mox digital bank in Hong Kong that had been scaled within the crypto sector.
it's a really good point that innovation comes from very, very unexpected areas. Connie, maybe just your sort of perspective on where the RegTech industry is up to, and maybe just on Benedict's point about do we not pat ourselves on the back enough about how much innovation there's been, and we're too critical on not innovating enough. I mean, what do you think the industry needs to do? Is it just keep doing what it's doing well, or does it need to be a bit more aggressive, dare I say, pushing some of the policy boundaries?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I will break it down into 3 segments as I open up. I think the first one, as I have 2 regulators here, I think regulators are important for RegTech, and I think there are growing interest with the regulators in terms of the RegTech market development. I would say the first one is we've seen some regulators already issuing some industry consultation survey where we contributed some of our inputs. We also have done some closed-door one-on-one meetings with the regulators, helping them understand and also giving them the feedback, the voice of the market from our customers, from our partners. I think that's important. And as a result of that, we've also seen some changes. As I think what Helen just said is really music to our ears, and we also see some of them being happen in the rest of the market as well. So one of them is really having the regulators changing their policies or actually clarifying their guidelines in terms of how RegTech can be adopted. So I think that's important, is because a lot of times the RegTechs are not coming from the financial services industry, so they may not fully understand the regulations. So I think that's one, to provide clarity to the market. I will say the second one is really creating the sandbox, because a lot of our customers and the environment, they don't really have the cloud environment or the data environment that they can test out these facilities. And also, allowing them to fail and learn fast is really unheard of for our industries, to be able to fail in front of a regulator, right? So I think it gives a lot of comfort to our innovation. So I think the act of the regulators is very important. The other development, we call it the hotline, and I think Helen called about the digital front door. It's the same thing. So I think having access to the regulators with non-financial services, which is the banks, where they have easy access to regulators, but for the fintechs or regtechs or subtechs, they don't. So I think having that, the hotline, so that they can answer questions and have access to have queries, I think those are the things that we are seeing the regulators are doing to drive the RegTech adoption. The last one I would say from the regulator's point of view is really doing industry events like this. So a few years back, I was on a panel with HKMA, and they're already promoting RegTech. I think that's another, I would say, drive for the industry. And I hope we can see more happening from the regulations perspective. And as what Benedict said, policies need to be upgraded because technology has always advanced, and regulatory guidelines, they're always behind technology because we always come up with a tech first. So I think, continuous that pace of change and updating the policy and the guidelines is really the way to go. If I switch it to RegTech and my partners, right, RegTech, subtech, I think one of the elements is some of them are really, startups. They need a lot of help and support. So we will continue to be a technology provider to them. So we will give them access to our, our startup program, which allow them to have tech resources, some of the, industry expertise and all of that. And I think the other piece is to give them the regulatory landscape, because a lot of our RegTech, subtech, they don't understand security, compliance, why the regulatory landscape. I think this is some of the industry expertise that we will provide to the partners. And the last one is our customers, right? Customers are the one who's ultimately the users, like what Benedict said. Banks are transferring money. So I would say technology, of course, is an important one. We've seen how technology has been taking up data and AI, cloud, the latest ChatGPT and OpenAI. I think these are the technology which allow them to really accelerate and drive faster adoption. And I think for Benedict, for what you just talked about sharing, I think we also have the confidential computing, which will be able to help AML. So I think some of the technology has been able to provide that support to the market. And our customers sometimes doesn't have the resources to build everything in-house, right? So that's why we were able to bring not just the broad technology, but also the RegTech and subtech, and also our traditional ISVs provider who can provide our AML solutions, KYC solutions, risk management, and all of that. So I think overall, we will continue to see the private-public collaboration, and hopefully, as a technology provider, we will continue to facilitate that dialogue, and hopefully more forums and more open discussions and open innovations for concepts and ideas is really what we see, and we hope we can facilitate that through the technology that we provide.
Thanks, Connie. And I think you've actually touched on, again, reflecting on, the really good things that have happened is, I think that breakthrough was really the willingness of regulators globally, as well as regulated entities to deal with small startup entities who can't get through the normal procurement processes. They don't have, you know, internal audit departments and information security departments. And I think that's really got us to this point. So thank you for sharing that. Helen, we've got 4 minutes left. So I might ask you to perhaps just talk a bit about opportunities in the next year or two in the subtech and regtech space. You know, where do you see the real opportunities and growth in the next sort of 1 to 2 years?
I think there's 3 areas that I see. First is more international cooperation on wide-ranging topics such as greenwashing and fraud and, you know, market behaviours by the regulators. I think we're going to see more of that. I think the second is where regulators such as ourselves are using more, showing more tangible examples of using cutting-edge technology such as synthetic data and tech sprints and applying, you know, the use of the technology as policies develop. And I think the third is the move from some early technologies into more scalable and more robust technologies. You know, I've seen speech to text has really evolved, really come on to, you know, a much more confident and scalable position. So I can see that's definitely going to be a game changer out there this year. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, again, I think the industry's ability to understand these new technologies and go through a process to, you know, effectively do the risk assessments now. And I know this session's not about, you know, AI and ChatGPT, but yeah, there's a plethora of issues which will arise in any broad application within regulated entities. But I think many institutions do actually have the framework now to you know, assess and understand and you know, go down an approval and implementation path. We have got a couple of minutes left. Maybe Benedict, I might just go back to you again. And I noticed the Basel Committee's work plan put out last year for 2023-24, digitisation of finance, AI and machine learning, big data and governance. Is that very much reflective of where you think the broader sort of, you know, central banks, regulators will be focused on, you know, the regulatory and compliance side of things in those areas, or is it still a bit of the back to basics of AML, you know, information security and cyber security?
No, I think you can view that as reflective of the focus areas. And I think each of the speakers here has rightfully identified big data and AI, I think, as key areas of interest across these different types of compliance. So whether it is for greenwashing or whether it is for AML, in fact, you can use that same AI technology or these big data technologies. I wanted to just add one more to this, which is we've obviously seen the collapse of a series of banks. And to be frank, there are, I suspect actually that based on public data, for example, a very simple one is sentiment analytics. That's a simple one. But there should be other technologies that already would indicated the risks of certain of these banks based on public information. So I distinguish there between subtech, which tends to be based on private filings of data by these banks with the regulators that may not be transparent to the general public, versus information that is available in the public domain. And as for myself, this is my second area of interest. So I expressed my earlier interest in AML-related solutions that can be federated, so to say, in these cross-border contexts. But here, I'm also interested in any solutions that use advanced technologies that can help identify, based on public information, are information already tracked by data providers, risk in certain market players. So, and I think we'll see more focus on that as well, given these recent collapses.
Connie, I think we're almost out of time, but maybe just I will give you the last word, just in terms of where you think areas of focus for the next 1 to 2 years are. And again, from a regulated entities perspective, there's almost like so much to do. Like, where do you actually spend your time in the broader RegTech sector? And then, of course, a lot of the innovation hubs and businesses are you know, coming up with new ideas from the customer and business side every day.
I think it's data, because I think all of us has leaned into that, because there's tons of data that we have not really been analyzed. And also there's a lot of technology on the cloud and also the use of AI. They all need technology or cloud on the data side. I think the regulations needs to open up, because right now there's still uncertainty whether you can put data in the cloud. And I, like a lot of the technology or algorithms or machine learning models, they are developed and they can be utilized on the cloud. So I think for us to really move forward is to really break down the barrier of cross-border and the data on the cloud.
Yeah, and I think again, just back on AI, it's very topical. Again, it actually gives you another dimension in data to think about, particularly from the I'll call it an outsourcing perspective, because I think a lot of regulated institutions and regulators have just got their minds around the more conventional outsourcing of operational activities, software providers. Obviously, cloud computing is an outsourced activity, but now when you get into AI, you're sort of outsourcing to a myriad of data sources that you can't possibly identify, because these AI engines are really just taking data from from the web, reinterpreting it, and then of course being used and stored in a different way within institutions. So it'd be interesting to see what the regulatory agenda does there. I think we're just about out of time. Deborah was warning us she was going to come in and knock us off. There we go. Deborah, we've had a great session. Thank you very much to Connie, Benedict, and Helen, and look forward to next year. We might ask for 10 more minutes next year, because we did run out of time to talk about these topics.
Thanks very much, Peter. And just to recap, I think the point that Helen made is data as an enabler. And big data and AI, I think, are front of mind. But what's clear is that regulators are collaborating, and I think that we'd also reflect that we can see that from where we're sitting. But ultimately, I think to Connie's point, our customers are definitely going to be driving the agenda, and we're definitely seeing that rise up as well. And so fantastic as well for Benedict to be able to share some of the fantastic work that BIS are doing through their innovation hubs. So without further ado, thank you so much. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to play you a short piece of music to introduce our next theme, which is People and Planet. So bear with us, tiny 15-second break, and then I'll introduce the next panel. Thank you. Welcome back to you. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next topic, which is People and Planet. We're going to get a little bit focused with the discussion between two fantastic industry practitioners. One is a RegTech founder who is helping organisations manage their ESG risks, who's going to moderate, and the other who leads the work in climate and environmental risk for a global bank. I'm delighted to introduce Evelyn Moore to you, who is going to be our moderator. She's an accomplished senior business leader with more than 25 years' experience in the specialist areas of ESG, sustainability, performance, business analytics, intelligence, AML, fraud, and public safety. Driven by her commitment to create world's best practice software solutions for the rapidly evolving ESG global market, her company, Green2View, spearheads the provision of excellence in sustainability compliance across the enterprise and SME markets. Green2View is a proud recipient of the RegTech Association's Excellence in ESG Award for 2022. Welcome to you, Evelyn.
Thank you, Deb.
And I'm also delighted to introduce Aoife McGillian. Aoife, I was introduced to through our former speaker, Benedict Nollins, from the previous panel, who felt that Aoife could very ably participate on this particular topic. Aoife is the APAC Climate and Environmental Risk Oversight Executive for the Bank of America, based in Hong Kong. She spent 11 years of her career working with Bank of America over two separate periods of time, previously holding roles as the APAC Risk COO, Regional Head of Regulatory Relations and Risk Governance, and Regional Head of Business Controls for Fixed Income, Currencies and Commodities in Global Markets. Aoife worked with the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission in the Risk and Strategy Unit between 2015 and 2017, focusing on green finance, fintech and industry risk management practices. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Evelyn to conduct our fireside chat.
Thanks very much, Deb. And good evening to everybody who's joining us on the call this evening. And hello to Aoife, who's in Hong Kong. And I know Aoife, like me, everyone who's on the call this evening is really keen to hear from you. And we do have a limited time. So what I'd like to suggest is that we get straight into our fireside chat. As Deb mentioned, you have an exceptional background in compliance and risk within financial institutions. But tonight I'd like to focus on your current role with Bank of America as the APAC Climate Risk Executive. So for all of us, it'd be great if you could share with us some insights into how you're preparing for the transition to a low carbon and net zero future, and the types of challenges and hopefully some of the opportunities that you've identified as you've incorporated climate risk factors into your operating strategy.
Great. Thanks very much for having me. Delighted to be here. So, you know, from a financial, I think I'll start with just the net zero, what it means to set a net zero goal from the perspective of a financial institution. And in relation to the opportunity, speaking specifically to the client aspect of that. So financial institutions' ability to sort of meet their net zero goals are sort of intrinsically related to intrinsically linked even to their clients' ability to do so as well. And what does it mean to have a net zero goal for a financial institution? Well, there's sort of three component parts. The first is, you know, the calculation or the estimation of greenhouse gas emissions and understanding what the drivers are for those emissions. The second piece is, you know, the evolution of sustainable finance and the development of all the products that are in that. And the third piece, which is sort of my bread and butter, which is the climate risk management. And that's how we integrate climate and environmental risk considerations into our risk framework, you know, with a view to protecting sort of business operations and assets. So just starting with the concept of, you know, financed emissions, and I'm going back again to the net zero goal being really intrinsically linked to clients. The calculation of our greenhouse gas emissions is based both on our direct emissions that come from our operations, and also those that come through our supply chain as well. And the supply chain for a bank in particular would be, you know, relate in a large part to its clients. And so, for example, when a borrower, if we lend to a borrower, we are directly responsible for a proportion of that borrower's emissions, and we call that financed emissions. So when we're thinking about our overall carbon footprint as a financial institution, we're thinking about everything from our direct emissions, but also those for every client and their emissions. And remembering that, you know, as a client calculates their emissions, they're also looking down their own supply chain. So we've got this whole supply chain of sort of data. So that's the first part. But how do you control then the, you know, the emissions of a client? Because there's no sort of direct control there. It's sort of a conversation about influence and how do we work with clients to help them manage down those carbon emissions in a meaningful way. And one of the key things that we use, and I guess this is where the opportunities come in, is sustainable financing. And that is conversations had between clients, client relationship managers and bankers with the clients to help them understand where their emissions are coming from and what are the financing solutions for that. And sustainable financing, you know, is not one big beautiful product. It's not sort of a universal product that can be, you know, solve all problems. It's really leveraging existing products that we have through sort of loans and bonds and making them, you know, green or sort of devices that can help to manage down greenhouse gas emissions for clients. So that's sort of the emissions and the interaction with the sustainable finance products. The climate risk management piece is also, as we're lending to clients, the bank's assets being a loan is exposed to certain amounts of climate risk, depending on what industry that client is in, but also what country or jurisdiction and how prone they are to increasing weather-related events, so physical climate risk, or increased costs associated with trying to either adapt or mitigate those, including sort of regulatory costs of compliance as those arise. And anything, obviously, even thinking from just a credit risk perspective, anything that impacts on the revenues or costs of a client in a negative way, it sort of potentially creates a credit, a credit concern. And so it's understanding how we can put a framework around that from a risk management perspective, and get a view to what extent our assets are exposed to climate. But just going back to the opportunities and all, there are lots of opportunities for clients, I think, in terms of their access to cheaper funding, and conversely, it'll be more expensive funding if they're not sort of able to demonstrate that they're taking action to adapt or mitigate. There's also access, obviously, to all of the new products or the existing products that are being sort of repurposed for sustainable finance purposes. Then, there's opportunities to invest in low carbon or climate resilient technology, and other opportunities in terms of just even the advisory around how do they identify where their carbon emissions arise from, and how to manage those, using financial products. We can't really speak about opportunities. We have to speak, without speaking about the challenges in terms of rolling out programs like this. And really, I think every climate conversation ever will always speak to data and regulation, and I suppose specifically to climate, it's about expertise as well. And the first thing to think about, I think, from a financial institution's perspective, is that it's really a really new concept. How do you manage climate risk? It's not new from the perspective of climate scientists. It's not new necessarily from the perspective of people who've been working in ESG, or even members of the the ESG community, or even members of sectors who have been calculating emissions for numbers of decades. But from a risk manager's perspective in a bank, it's a very new concept. For a department who now has to calculate the emissions related to our clients, that's it's new. It's new to the finance department, the legal department, the whole risk department, the technology department, and so it's been a challenge, I think, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, since banks really started to adopt or disclose, make public commitments to achieve net zero and build climate-related programs, because the expertise related to this, hasn't existed. It's not something that's necessarily in the market that's available to hire. Of course, there are people who are, trained in or have been educated in this, but of course, having that on the ground experience is not something that's been freely available. And so the real challenge of the last number of years is, at the same time, we have to build programs and embed this throughout the firm in these programs around how to manage risk and to educate, whether it's client managers on how to have conversations with clients, etc., or how to calculate emissions. There is a sense that we're doing it from a starting point. So it has been like a great learning opportunity as well, but there has been, a challenge in terms of expertise. The benefit, of course, of, over the last couple of years is that there has been a significant uptake in this, both driven by regulatory interests in having climate risk frameworks, but also by firms making these commitments to net zero. And so I think that's sort of helped to build if you want, the ecosystem of support that is developing, and particularly like consultants now have not just, you know, theoretical knowledge, but they've experienced by working with their clients how to go about putting in place sort of the appropriate levels of programs for you know, to help banks or financial institutions manage their climate risk and the full program. So I guess those are the key things. I kind of, maybe I'll just reference that. I appreciate we don't have a huge amount of time, but you're just thinking about my own personal journey. You know, in 2015, 2015, sorry, was sort of a pivotal point, not just because of the Paris Climate Summit, but also because I guess the task force for climate-related financial disclosures was first, you know, conceptualized and brought about, and that helped to set, in many ways, the frameworks by which we think about climate risk. But you know, that year was also kind of important for my own personal learning. And I was asked at the time, I was working for a different firm, and I was asked to go out to a particular event and you know, I was given half an hour's notice, sorry, and I was asked to go out, and all I had to do is sit in the back and take notes and sort of give face, and that was the mandate. It was a green finance event that was, you know, not supposed to be anything, you know, too world rocking, just give face. So I went out, and as I arrived, I was the last to arrive, and they handed me a microphone, and they said, you know, you're going to be leading your industry group discussion on the effects of climate change on your industry. And I thought, that's not the mandate, for starters. You know, sit in the back, take notes, give face. The second thing, you know, that I thought was like financial services, financial industry. I mean, how is it that climate risk really impacts on the financial industry? Is this the right event? It was supposed to be a green finance event. And then the third thing was like, what on earth am I going to say? You know, how can I actually conceptualize this? So, I mean, I could think about green bonds. I knew that there was, you know, green bonds, some product development, etc., but didn't really know very much. Anyway, they opened the doors, and it wasn't a podium type of event. It was actually a workshop event set up with a series of desks around, you know, with people sitting around them. And there were lots of confused faces, but it was, you know, a 3-4 hour event where we all sat around brainstorming about how climate risk was going to impact on the financial sector. And this was 2015, so there wasn't a huge amount of, you know, sort of framework or thinking put around it necessarily at that point. And I'm not sure that we really cracked it in that session. But what it did for me was it sort of sparked this interest in, you know, how would I answer that question better if I was asked it again? And so I kept over the years kind of keeping up to date with how things have evolved. And that learning journey has obviously been very valuable to me, but I see a lot of what I see in terms of challenge is really trying to educate people and you know, get them over that understanding of how climate really impacts on, you know, from a practical perspective on a bank or another financial institution.
Could I ask you about your clients, for example, and this is looking at it as you as the financier, looking at, say, the supply chain within the clients that you're lending to. So for most organizations, over up to 90%, if not more, of their emissions and so forth and their risk is associated with their supply chain. How do you see that, the take-up of compliance and risk analysis and with regard to climate risk being implemented into the clients that you're lending to or financing, etc.? Are you seeing that as more and more as an uptake?
Well, yeah, I guess there's a driver there. There's two reasons, right? I guess there is, you know, well, for starters, if every bank is reaching out to their clients and has the same type of strategy that's going to pressure, they need data. We can't understand our carbon footprint without our clients, you know, and at the moment, the accounting standards for carbon, which have been set by PCAF, you know, they acknowledge that we have to make estimates around certain types of clients, right, or certain clients, and they're still in early stage development, although we, you know, sort of at a stage of completion as well for certain sectors. So there's definitely a push from, you know, bankers or banking towards client or financial institutions, because we can't understand what our greenhouse gas emissions are. The other push is obviously, regulation, and there is regulation coming if it's not already there. There has been uptake. You can look at the stats, I guess, in terms of just voluntary uptake of some of the existing frameworks, and that's kind of encouraging. But there's probably more to be done. And so I guess it's a collaboration between the people who need the data and which is all of the stakeholders. I would consider regulators stakeholders in that as well, in that sort of journey. So there's definitely a positive momentum, I think, in terms of being able to get data, but still a ways to go.
And do you have a view as into, and I know we've had previous discussions around this, the greenwashing and the carbon credits, etc. Would you like to explore that a little bit, as into the use of carbon credits for organisations in reducing and trying to get to net zero?
Well, I guess it's one of the strategies, isn't it? There are two schools of thought. One is that you focus on the emissions reduction, and the other is that you create the offsets. I guess it's at the moment, I guess it relies on there being firmer standards coming out about what is the right approach to take.
And as far as the uptake, I guess, of net zero strategies, just generally over the last few years, you're seeing the trend moving positively, obviously, even without firm regulations, but more driven heavily by the financial markets requirements?
Yes, so both. I mean, I think the first banks set their net zero targets or goals back in 2018 or 19. And now this is, going by Accenture data from November of last year, 60% of global banks have made sort of public commitments to that. That's global banks, obviously. It's not referring to maybe domestic banks with no international footprint. But the other interesting thing that's sort of driving, there's two sides. One is a voluntary public commitment, and the other is the regulatory drive. And what we have seen is, certainly in markets across APAC and across the globe, are the regulators also bringing out guidelines, or not necessarily rules, but guidelines that are sort of pointing in the direction of, good climate risk management practices, and that is also helping to sort of instill that within the other banking sector.
And you touched on data and the use of data with regard to being able to ascertain emissions and so forth. Putting a RegTech hat on and coming from, technology companies' focus, where do you see that technology, and particularly technology in RegTech, can add value to the data and the integrity and the validation of the data, perhaps, to help?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, there's a supply chain of data that's necessary, and also we're moving past just focusing on climate risk to think about wider social and environmental risk factors as well, and that just increases the number of data, or the amount of data. And with the disclosure standards coming out, it's going to force supply chain disclosures across the board, so it becomes a big data point, isn't it?
Yes.
And with that, I mean, and the standards are necessary evil in a way. We need reliable, consistent, accurate, good data, and in order to do that, standards are kind of required, and that sort of drives the need for validation. So creates its own little ecosystem of data validation needs to be done. It needs to be audited for it to be used, and so then there's the data sort of organization piece of that, and how do you capture all of that data in a way that can be sort of easily absorbed. So there's definitely a need for the use of technology in terms of just even analytics.
There definitely is there's a lot of talk with regard to the accounting firms, professional firms, looking at when we move toward having non-financial reporting around, for example, ESG. Do you see that as obviously beneficial to addressing the risk associated with climate change?
Well, I mean, I think they're all interrelated in a way, right? I mean, there is a social aspect and a wider environmental aspect to climate, so they're all interrelated. But even thinking about how regulation is looking, it's looking in certain jurisdictions we already have environmental and social regulation, and that's kind of driving the need for sorry, hi Deb. It's driving for yes, again for data. So we are seeing there's obviously data standards already out there. The GRI has had data standards that have looked at wider environment and social, including climate risk specific data, and can expect that probably will continue to evolve.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I can see Deb's already just on the screen, so I think that might be our wind up.
Yes, I appreciate that, Evelyn. We could have, stayed online for a lot longer to discuss that. And thank you so much, Aoife. I think what I liked about the discussion was, and probably now reflecting on what you're saying, it is indeed probably a new concept on how organisations, do manage their climate risks and to build programs to educate. And one of the things that I think that our association and like industry associations do, we have an important role to play there in that actual education process, and also showing you the opportunities that exist within our networks of different vendors that have different ways, that can actually help your people and equip them with real tools that can help manage the data. I don't think we've gone through a single session without mentioning the word data. So I just wanted to thank you both very much. That was very insightful. And what we're going to do is we're going to have another short piece of music before I introduce the next panel. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Aoife.
Thanks, Aoife.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks very much for joining us again. In our global search for like-minded organisations and individuals, it's my greatest pleasure to introduce the Regulatory Innovation Fireside Chat with Jane and Lukash. The European Central Bank is doing some super interesting and innovative work in the soup tech space, and I've had the great pleasure of meeting both of these fantastic people in person. And I know you're going to enjoy this discussion. Jane coming to us from New York and Lukash coming to us from Germany?
From Frankfurt, yes.
From Frankfurt, there we go. So let me introduce Jane first, who's going to be our moderator. Jane is the Chief Operating Officer from FINOS, the Open Source Foundation. And she looks after strategic initiatives and projects, member and community success initiatives, and corporate operations. And she works closely with the FINOS team and FINOS community to promote adoption and curation of business-relevant open source projects across financial services. Before joining FINOS, Jane was Managing Director at Credit Suisse, where she was the Global Head of Reference Data Technology Services. And to Lukash Kubicki, he's the Head of Supervision Technology Section at the European Central Bank. His team is responsible for driving the implementation of cutting-edge technologies across the ECB banking supervision. Lukash joined the SSM in 2015, and since then he has led a number of SSM-wide projects and initiatives, and he's also worked in McKinsey & Co, managing engagements in the area of strategy and digitalisation in the banking sector. I'm going to hand over to the two of you to do your fireside chat. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Deborah. Thanks a lot. And Lukasz, hi, nice to see you again, and really excited to engage with you and our audience in this talk. So
hello everyone.
Let's just jump right into it. Tell us, why is it a priority for the ECB banking supervision to invest in digital transformation?
So first of all, we need to analyze the large and growing amount of data, both qualitative and quantitative, and that's I think the main reason. But there are also two other aspects that I would like to highlight. We need also to keep up with digitalization that is happening worldwide. We see it changes in every organization, but also maybe in particular in the financial sector, in the banking sector, new business models, the disintegration of the value chain within the banks, or like the strong presence of fintech. All of that is creating the new environment which we need to supervise as supervisors. And finally, we see new challenges coming with changing environment, with high inflation, with the war, with the climate change, and all of that makes digitalization, innovation not something, let's say, nice to have it, but a need, a must. So if we want to be relevant as supervisors, if you want to bring value to the banks, to the society, we need to invest in digitalization and in innovation.
Yeah, that goes that word data again, as the previous speakers have highlighted. So what kind of technologies do you guys leverage and for the tools that you develop, and what are the key elements of your program?
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of the technologies, I think we leverage on a variety of technologies. Let me name a few, like artificial intelligence, of course, including then the machine learning, the natural language processing, then also robotic process automations. As as organization, we have a lot of processes that where robots could and are helping. Then we have the low code development platforms and definitely also the cloud computing. But I think what is very important is that we don't take these technologies in isolation. So they are the most powerful when integrating. So the computing power comes from the cloud computings, and that help us to rely on artificial intelligence and to run, for example, the machine learning jobs on big data sets. So all of that you cannot take in isolation, but really put into together and connect the dots from a technology perspective. And definitely, what is also important for us is not to to stay where we are, but also look into the future. And we just discussed last week's how can we create ChatGPT for supervision? How would which business needs would that address? What value would that drive? So definitely the new developments, also from a technology perspective, are of great attention, great importance to us. Maybe looking at the questions on the overall program, what you say, what are the key elements? So definitely the technology, this is something important, but it's not the only element that we take into account when looking at our digital transformation journey. I think what is really at the core are the users. So at the ECB, we believe that we'd like to make users, supervisors fall in love with subtech, with the technology, that they have this superior user experience and functionalities that these technologies offer. The other element that is also of critical importance is about partnerships. So we do not rely only on internal expertise, knowledge, but what we think in driving such digital transformation, in building the supervisory technologies, it's so important to connect, to exchange, to collaborate. And we do it with leading institutions, with academia, with startups, with IT industry. All of that to to bring a little bit of the external expertise and to boost our efforts and to boost the innovation. And maybe last point that I would like to emphasize, which is also like of great magnitude, is about the culture. And in fact, I think this is one of the key aspects also in this in our work. We would like that the staff, the managers across the European banking supervision embrace this kind of startup culture, and we via different engagements, via training, via events, and through that, this change management process that is so important in the innovation work can be conducted successfully.
So that sounds like people, and people. So while you're doing digitalization, it's really all about the people, both internal and changing culture and creating partnerships. Can you give us a quick example?
I like
Can you give us a quick example of a tool that you have developed or implemented?
Yes, we have started our digitalization transformation journey around 2 years ago, but we have already, let's say, more than a dozen of tools that are live and that are serving supervisors across Europe and bringing the tangible impact in the day-to-day work. And I think we are very, very very proud of the speed that in a relative short time frame we were able to deliver the tools and to see that impact. And yes, one of maybe the example is of the tool that went live a few months ago is Navi. Is a short name for a network analytics and visualization tool. And Navi supports the analysis of complex data networks using graph analytics and intuitive interface visualization toolbox. So it combines data from various data sources and provides supervisors, experts, analysts with a comprehensive overview of, for example, of bank ownerships. So if we want to know who is the ultimate owner of the bank, definitely we had that information, but probably that was not readily available, taking into account the complex ownership structures across the banking industry. So Navi is a really powerful tool, and today in the context of increasing connections within the financial sectors, I think it's of great relevance, of great importance.
That sounds like a tool that everybody needs. So speaking of things that everybody needs and everybody can share in development, I want to highlight a little bit of what we do at FINOS. As Deborah said, we are a nonprofit organization, and we focus on collaboration and innovation in financial services specifically through the adoption of open source software standards and best practices. And in fact, we actually have a strategic initiative that focuses on specifically driving innovation in the regulatory space. And one of our key efforts there, speaking of people, is also trying to bring everybody, all actors and all participants in financial services to the table for these collaborations. So turning to you and your exposure to open source and open collaboration and a tool such as Navi potentially, right? There are many tools that can be shared where potentially development of a data structure can be, standard data modeling can be shared, or even just technology tooling around it. What role do you see open source playing in the development of your tools?
First of all, congratulations on all your work that you are doing in FINOS, and I think it's of great great impact, and it's about sharing, connecting, collaborating, and that makes so much, brings so much value to all. And I see, of course, open source code and software are really key in for digital innovation. So they promote, the collaboration, the knowledge sharing across, large and then global community. But I think, thanks to open source, we can simply solve problems more quickly. And by having the vast amount of experience, of knowledge available in the community, and that's definitely, boosts and stimulate innovation, creativity, allows us to go, quicker, and maybe allow us not to reinvent the wheel. If someone has tackled the problem, someone has already the code in place, then you can jump on that and go much quicker, much more impactful. Yes. And yeah, when we look at the most innovative tools, also in the field of supervisory technology, they indeed rely to some degree on, or at least are inspired by open source solutions and best practices. And in that context, at the ECB, we also use open source, and the use of the open source is highly encouraged.
So thinking more broadly, what partnerships do you use for the development of your tools, whether they're open or not? You mentioned partnerships before. Let's dig into that.
Yeah. No, I said that it's partnership is one of the key elements in our SSM digitalization strategy, in the SSM digitalization blueprint, and indeed it's of great relevance. So first of all, we jointly develop tools and services, and working with on one hand internally with people from different areas, end users and IT innovation experts. So this kind of partnership in development increases the ownership and ensures that all the perspectives are well addressed, and you have this interdisciplinary setup that allows to address the challenges and drive towards success. We also create a joint knowledge base and ensure regular exchanges via open platforms such as Approach, to where we share information via like virtual lab, which is one of the platform where we collaborate on building subtech solutions. What we also foster a lot is a culture of collaboration and innovation. So it's innovation not only requires, let's say, this technical knowledge advances, but also this mindset allowing people, to have open mind and to see new approaches, and to challenge the old patterns. So this collaborations, partnerships, both within, strong within the organization, but like outside, when I said, we partnership with academia, with startups, with the industry, are of I think of great value, and allow us to definitely widen the horizon, go quicker, not reinvent the wheel, and bring the relevant expertise on the table when it is needed. Yeah.
So speaking of cultural change, it's a very interesting topic. Again, we seem to be talking about digitalization, but really it's all about the people, right, and the acceptance. Yes. So speaking of cultural change, can you tell us a little bit about how did you go about changing the culture of the organization? How was your program received? And were there any interesting or unexpected challenges along the way that you could share, maybe as advice for people to tackle?
Okay, yeah. No, definitely. I think I really like what you said, that this digital transformation is about people, and that's why we put this culture aspect also as one of the key elements in the strategy. How our program is perceived, I think it is when you look at the numbers and statistics that shows the use of different subtech tools. I see this hockey stick graph with growing number of users for many of the tools and platforms. It gives us this comfort. Yes, this is what we produce, what we deliver is something that is really needed and is satisfying the end user needs. And I think, but I think to achieve this ice hockey stick growth, we needed to also invest, not only produce good tools, but also invest into this culture and change management process. And as part of that, for example, we have partnership with INSEAD Business School, and we have launched major digital training and innovation training program for all staff and leaders across the organization. So from analysts to the supervisory board members who were trained on artificial intelligence, on innovation, on change management. And up to today, I think we have trained around 2,000 people on that with a very good feedback. And I think this kind of investments in the training program, into the different events that we are organizing, the conferences, now pays off and allows people to better understand, the technologies, and allow them to see that technologies, can help them in the day-to-day life. We have this year, we have the poster subtech at your fingertips. I think last year, the first poster was, don't let subtech scare you. And that was that was the message. It's like, yes, AI, robotics, they are there to help you. Don't let them scare you. So that was an important, I think that was the important message we wanted also to.
I really like the poster idea. I think we should do more of that. But that's a very interesting point, in that you can't just drop a piece, like an application on the desktop or something on people's phone, without training them and maybe immersing them a little bit in around the promise of what technology can do for them and where people are relevant. You also mentioned process automation. Process automation is for repetitive tasks and not necessarily just to eliminate the human interaction, right? So I think that's a critical way to educate people. How should the interaction change, but not necessarily go away?
Right.
So I'm not sure how much more time we have, so I'll jump to one question that I think may be interesting for the audience, which is, what suggestions would you make for the audience today? What actions would you say, based on your experience, should they take in creating RegTech software, for example, or moving along the digitalization path?
Yeah, I think I think one of the lessons we learn is to be successful, you need to set up really agile, multidisciplinary innovation teams. Bring people from the organization, bring people from the outside the organization, and work together. And I think we have done that, and these teams must be empowered. They must be able to drive the projects and be kind of, startups within well-established organizations. And I think this is one of the key success factors that we consider. The other one that I would like to highlight is really, innovation cannot be, delivered for the sake of innovation and, checking this or that technology. Innovation has to address, the underlying business needs and supervisory needs in our context. So when we started, it was not that me or my colleagues were sitting which tool, which need, but we ran, a great number of workshops with the teams on the ground and trying to identify what are the key pain points that the technology could help. And I think through this user focus, business focus, we were able to succeed.
There you go. Hi, Deborah. So we're talking about digitalization, but we're talking more about people than anything else, actually, in this. Thank you, Lukasz. That was very, very interesting.
Thank you, Jane. It was.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jane and Lukasz. And I want to commend you for a couple of things. First of all, you're the first person to ever have a SupTech poster. So that's number one. Number two, very interestingly, you've really talked a lot about people, and you were also the first person to mention culture. And I also think you were the first person to say Chat GPT for supervisors. So very, very interesting and fantastic work that the Open Source Foundation does. So thank you very much to Jane and Lukasz for joining us, and I hope to see you both again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we are going to do two things. One is we're going to put a poll up, a quality poll, and we'd really appreciate it if you could complete that. The poll will remain up. You can respond to it, and it will stay up there for those who would like to complete it later in the session. So we're going to pop that up for you. And now, just before we introduce our next panel, we're going to play a short video from Investment New South Wales. Thank you so much. Hello again. Well, we've arrived at our favourite topic. So that is talking about acceleration of the adoption of RegTech and how can we work as a global community to accelerate this adoption and to continue to educate and inspire people. We can't rest on our laurels because as an industry, the data says that we are accelerating well and shortening the sales cycle, but what more could be achieved by partnering with global nonprofits and think tanks? By bringing together two eminent speakers here from different ends of the spectrum, one a female RegTech founder who is scaling and growing her business globally, and the lead for global fintech innovation for the World Economic Forum. It's my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Lisa Ison. Lisa is an accomplished entrepreneur and executive with a track record of success in leading product and engineering teams across multiple industries. As the founder and CEO of Skyjed, a product management and governance platform, she brings extensive experience in technology, telecommunications, IoT, and healthcare markets. Lisa also serves as the Deputy Chair of the RegTech Association. Welcome to you, Lisa. I also just need to let you know, Lisa has advised me that in her building they have scheduled a fire alarm, which is likely to go off for a very brief time during her chat, but unfortunately that was one of these things with live TV is beyond our control. So welcome, Lisa. I'd now like to welcome Drew Propson, who is the Head of Technology and Innovation in Financial Services at the World Economic Forum. She leads a portfolio of initiatives focused on advancing innovation while maintaining financial system stability. Current and recent work has centred on the acceleration of artificial intelligence and emerging technologies in financial services, technology-driven systemic risks and mitigation approaches, and the impact of COVID-19 on the fintech industry. Drew has additionally presented and authored work on financial inclusion, entrepreneurship, and fintech regulation. I welcome you both and hand over to you, Lisa, to moderate the discussion. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Deb. And hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Ison, as Deb said, the founder and CEO of Skyjed. And Skyjed's a product lifecycle and governance platform. So, Drew, welcome. Excited to have you here today and looking forward to our discussion on that important area of the adoption and collaboration across our ecosystem. So I think we'll dive straight in. We've got some really interesting sort of topics to take you through. So Drew, maybe if we just kick off, I'm really keen to get some of your just top line thoughts to, frame our discussion around some of the benefits you're seeing for RegTech, and, maybe if we just recap on why it's timely right now before we dive into the discussion.
Certainly. First of all, thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And while I don't have a fire alarm, I do see that sometimes my internet is a little weak. So if you have troubles hearing me, do let me know. I will try to dial in on my phone, then we'll make this work. But to answer your question, I think this is such a perfect time to be either an entrepreneur in the RegTech space or subtech space, or also just be in the general ecosystem, particularly because we've been seeing, I would say usually RegTech doesn't get in the news very much, which is unfortunate. Usually the front-facing innovations seem to get the bulk of the attention. But recently, with some of the issues that have been happening, of course, with the SVB collapse and other areas where it's really come to the forefront in terms of how do we make sure that we are being cautious with checks and balances of financial institutions of all sizes. There should be opportunity for financing as well as finding good talent in the area.
Yeah, no, that's great. You did fade out a little bit there, Drew, but I guess just to add to that, some of the sort of top line thoughts from my perspective, from that sort of founder of a RegTech, I think, one of the key areas that I'm sort of seeing globally now in my domain as product lifecycle governance is that I'm seeing sort of businesses and CEOs wanting to adopt the RegTech, which is going beyond those obvious benefits of your cost savings and your productivity benefits to, seeing RegTech, particularly in the lifecycle management space, lifecycle governance, seeing it as a key driver of their growth and innovation agendas. So I think that's an exciting move for RegTech because, traditionally, as you're saying, we have been seen in that sort of risk and compliance space, which is really, really important. But what I'm seeing is that, organizations are seeing RegTech solutions really important for that growth and innovation, but also to get closer to their customers and embed that, whether it be sustainability, whether it be fair value for their solutions, really embed that across the organisations, and of course doing that in multiple industry segments. So Drew, really sort of interested just to dig into this a little bit more, and I guess move the discussion to I guess from your perspective, from the World Economic Forum perspective, what opportunities are you seeing for RegTech, and as an ecosystem, how can people get involved in that and engage to speed up the innovation that we're seeing?
Yeah, so there's definitely interest. So we work heavily with public sector as well as private sector, and we have seen really across the board from financial institutions to, oh, sorry, is my sound okay?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. Not just about, like you were saying, compliance, thinking, sorry, is my sound, I keep seeing the little link saying my sound is not okay.
You're back in now. I just might get you to sort of just recap on that key message, and
sure. If it happens again, thank you. If it happens again, I will jump on the phone here and see if we can do that. No, but just to say that across the board, public sector, private sector, a lot of enthusiasm for this space. What we don't have full clarity on quite yet is where the funding is. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're really excited about this space and you're trying new things, great, but you're going to need that constant and continuous stream of funding, and it's not light, right? So what we're trying to do at the forum is do a little bit more research to gather data on that, to see where there may be funding gaps in certain regions, certain areas, particularly where RegTech is needed. So on that front, we're going to really try hard to be continuing to support the evolution of RegTech. But I will also just say that with the complexities, particularly in financial services of regulation, and regulation should be complex. Also some nervousness about the macroeconomic climate. Thank you. Just say there is a little nervousness about the macroeconomic climate, but I think nothing that can't be overcome, and hopefully the enthusiasm will trump that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and just some thoughts of what you're seeing around, opportunity, the collaboration in the ecosystem to drive some of that forward. I mean, obviously, from my perspective, the role of scale ups and startups in driving that innovation, I think, is a really important area for the ecosystem, whether it be the regulators or CEOs in organizations adopting the RegTech, is that it's an exciting space to be. And I think also, as RegTechs, as a founder, myself, I've sort of come into this space with deep expertise in life cycle management, with a problem statement around life cycle governance and how we can solve for that. So I think there's many benefits in organizations where they not only get the tech, the reg tech, but they get those sort of deep insights from the founders and the team. But then also, as you start to grow and scale, and what I'm seeing again from the Skyjed perspective is that going into organizations, the benefits that you bring in, the learnings that you've got across your deployments, not just for the adoption of the technology, but around best practices and that digital transformation of the organization. I mean, certainly that's one thing that's resonating for us at the moment. We've just hit that 100 companies on the platform. So my experience, and many of the RegTechs have that those insights and best practices to share with organizations.
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations. That's a big win with the 100. What I have noticed is the nice thing about RegTech and SupTech, I would say as well, is it is a pretty tight community, and players definitely know one another. The regulators, I think the enthusiasm there seems to be quite valuable. So having the feedback loops that are continuous, so that one can iterate and really.
So I think we've just you're just back now, Drew. We just lost you there for a minute, just as you were sort of talking about the benefits of that agility and engaging with the regulators.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Just to say that we have seen with this enthusiasm quite a bit of work in the sandbox space. So a lot of regulators building out their sandboxes such that new companies or companies in middle stages can, of course, test in a controlled environment, but also have that immediate feedback loop so that they can be continuously improving upon the work that they're doing. That's been great. We've also seen a bit more collaboration between RegTechs than we've seen. There's of course inherent competition, but just because the lessons learned are not easy and they're
Yeah, we just lost you there for a moment, Drew, so I might just get you to recap on that.
Okay. Let me try one more time, and then I am going to try my phone if this keeps happening. I'm very sorry. Just to say that we've seen as particularly lately, just more collaboration across entrepreneurs as well in the startup space. So not just with the regulators, but tends to be a bit more of a friendly space. Of course, competitive dynamics, but a little more of a friendly space than other areas of fintech. So it's quite helpful then for those just starting out, having some of the same problems and really collaboratively overcoming some of the challenges. So there's power in numbers. It's a good environment to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, definitely from a founder perspective and working in the RegTech Association, collaboration now globally, it's exciting sort of sharing those opportunities and also the engagement into organizations, whether it's from a risk perspective or the sort of product governance perspective or the domains that we cover. So I guess flipping it over the other side, Drew, as the sort of ecosystem matures, we're at this exciting stage of the innovation. We've got significant amount of drivers out there that are pushing the demand for RegTech. If we look at it from the some of the potential risks that you're seeing in growing RegTech, so that we do get those benefits, things that we need to kind of consider in the landscape from the different perspectives. Can you share some, maybe thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk as we see RegTech growing is the talent scarcity risk. So wonderful that we're having digital transformation in all aspects of financial services right now, but we do know that we have just a huge talent gap. And so if you're creating something that once it gets to a certain level, financial institutions are really depending upon what happens when you're really struggling with the talent to keep everything operational. So if we're just looking at cybersecurity, for example, can have, thank you. Let me put there. I think I'm back. Most individuals in the tech space have a good degree or range of options, and we need to make sure that we have good talent coming into the RegTech space. So a solution to this, or a potential solution, is working a little bit more with universities, partnering up fintechs as well as larger institutions with universities, really working on increasing skills of the employees that you have, as well as trying to get more individuals into the tech space going forward. I think the talent gap is just going to continue, and we want to make sure that we have the right resources available when we need them.
Yeah, exactly. And just on fleshing out some of those risks, and I guess how we mitigate them. I think the kind of scale ups and startups also, with that talent gap, but in terms of the scalability and the potential of the solutions, cloud technology now and the technology that we can use, it makes those solutions relevant to a lot of industry sectors, and also to different problems that they're solving. So some of those other risks that you're seeing around the collaboration between the startups potentially and the regulator.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I think in terms of the collaboration, that's just a solid win. I'm not sure that there's a lot of risk there, but where I do see risk is depending too much upon technology, and this came up a little bit in the past conversation, just making sure that human component is in there too. So, and this is actually laughable considering my tech situation right now, but one of the things we do need to think about is cloud concentration, and depending on too many core infrastructure players. And what happens when there's an outage or there are some blips in the system. That's something that one needs to really keep their eye on and be thinking about diversity of options, so that we don't become too dependent on technology or certain providers.
Yeah. Okay. So that's just wrapping up now, I guess, Drew, with one sort of final thought as we sort of close out the session. So I guess going back to where we started, some of the positives and opportunities for engagement. So for people out there listening that want to get engaged with the work that you're doing at the World Economic Forum, what are some of the opportunities, say, coming up in the next sort of 6 to 12 months to engage around some of these key themes that we're seeing in the industry?
Yeah. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're running a startup, would encourage you to look on the forum's website at our Tech Pioneers program or our Global Innovators program. And this is where we integrate a lot of startups into the work that we're doing on all aspects of, well, across industries, but in my area, tech innovation and financial services. For regulators, policymakers, we're probably already in touch with you, but if not, do reach out and we'll make sure that we keep the conversation going. We really like to have both startups as well as more advanced players, as well as the public sector represented in our initiatives as we try to tackle challenges, but also some of our just open roundtable conversations to make sure that we're really pinpointing what those challenges are and can start working towards solutions.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Drew. And I guess just one final thought from me on the sort of founder perspective, the opportunity for RegTech. And again, what I'm seeing is that it's going beyond the important areas of cost savings and productivity benefits. But as you get into an organization, that challenge that businesses often have about, how do they operationalize, say, a product governance framework using RegTech, there's significant benefits in that in terms of the change management and the adoption cycles. So, a great case study that I'm seeing is the organization that just wanted to lift the standard of their life cycle governance, again, with RegTechs, with our solutions and other RegTech solutions out there. The time from sort of starting to onboarding and embedding those in your organization has shifted from, weeks or long periods of time down to be able to be onboarded with, effective customer frameworks and embed that across the organization between your sort of product teams, your compliance teams, and embed that responsible lifecycle management in your business. So, significant benefits to that adoption and speeding up that adoption across different sectors.
Lisa, maybe if I can just point out, sorry, one quick point, Deborah, just to say to you that I think I mentioned.
I think we've lost Drew.
You know what? Deborah, please come in. Thank you.
No, that's okay. You know what you could do, Drew, is put your final point in the chat. I don't know whether you have access to the actual delegate platform, but you could put your final point in the chat. I'm sorry about that. We've had some problems with your tech, but I did want to say before you go anywhere, I think it's really interesting that you're doing the research on the funding gaps, because if we want to support the evolution of RegTech, definitely that is much needed. So I'm waiting with bated breath on that report to be published. But also you raise a very good point around this whole idea about talent scarcity risk, and that hasn't come up in our conversations yet today on this forum. So I've written that down as something for us to consider as we go into our live face-to-face event tomorrow. And Lisa, to you, thank you. Very well done. Thanks very much for moderating today. And we're looking forward to seeing you in London very soon. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks very much. Now, I'm delighted to invite you to join us for our final panel. And this final panel will give us some food for thought as we head out in the world after today. Moderated by someone who cares deeply about data and technology, and joining him are leaders from around the world, including an academic come RegTech, an international policy and advocacy organisation, and a regulator. Welcome to our session entitled The Importance of Regulatory Data, Taxonomies, Standards and Interoperability for Accelerating Innovation. And it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Will Liang, who will be our moderator. He's an executive director at MA Asset Management, where he looks after data analytics and technology for the organisation. He has a long and stellar career in both consulting and financial services, where he has built systems that drive investment performance, has developed analytics used by fund managers and owners to improve asset performance. He has also advised numerous corporations on data and technology strategies and has guided venture capital firms and investors on technology due diligence. He also serves as a director on the RegTech Association and is our treasurer. And I also notice he says he is the proud father of a 10-year-old boy. Well done to you. So thank you. And we also wanted to welcome Alex Kachaturian, who serves as a director in FINRA's Office of Financial Innovation in Washington, D.C. Alex supports OFI's mission in the identification and analysis of emerging technologies, laws and regulations, business models and industry practices that help inform FINRA's risk management and strategy goals. His primary areas of focus in recent years have been intersection of technology, law and regulatory compliance. Thank you and welcome to Alex for being here with us, and also from Washington, D.C., Conan French. Conan is a senior advisor, digital finance at the Institute of International Finance. His work centres on advising the leadership of IIF on fintech innovations such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain technology, new payment systems, mobile banking, and digital financial inclusion. The IIF is a global association of financial institutions with 500 members from 70 countries. And certainly not last, but certainly not least, Bob Wardrop. Bob is the founder and CEO of RegGenome, a commercial spin-out from a research project at the Cambridge Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge, where he is also a member of the finance faculty and a founding director of the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance. Welcome to you, Bob. And I'm now going to hand over to Will to see us out on this final panel. Thank you, Will.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for the kind introduction. I actually cannot remember how many times you've introduced me on stage. I get excited every time you do so. So it's actually getting quite addictive, I must say. Thank you, Deborah. It is actually quite important to be excited at the moment because it is almost 11:30 in Sydney, Australia. I want to give a very quick shout out to the staff members behind the stage at this hour in Sydney to support this program. Certainly Deborah herself, Alison, and Hong. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. No matter where you are, I want to give you a very warm welcome. In this session, we will explore the importance of regulatory data taxonomy, standards, and interoperability in relation to innovation. In an increasingly interconnected world, the role of regulators is more important than ever to maintain stability, safety, and fairness across industries. Regulatory agencies are entrusted with responsibilities of setting and enforcing rules that govern the collection and storage and exchange of data. By focusing on data taxonomy, standards, and interoperability, can we create an environment that fosters innovation, at the same time ensure the protection of customers? That is a very big question, and that is a very difficult question. So in 2023, what do we do when we face a difficult question? I asked ChatGPT. So I did ask ChatGPT that particular question. Can regulatory data taxonomy, standards, and interoperability accelerate innovation? And I asked ChatGPT to give me a yes and no answer. Right? Do not tell me it depends. Give me yes, no answer, or I'll go ask Google. So ChatGPT said one word, yes. No, but that was the first time I asked that question. Then I copy and paste the exact same question to ChatGPT the second time. It said no. And the third time it said yes. So clearly ChatGPT was very confused about that question. Luckily, with great honor, I'm joined by three real experts in this space to explore this particular topic with me today. So thank you for joining me, Alex, Conan, and Bob. Bob, if I can start with you, I'll pass the virtual microphone to you. What do you think are the challenges in how regulations are developed, written, and enforced today? And how does this hinder the innovation in the industry?
Yeah, well, before I kick off, we'll just say that the ChatGPT yes, no, in fact, there is a way to get to consistent yeses or consistent nos. And we'll talk about that perhaps in a half an hour. But just to address your point quite specifically, look, the overall challenge here, right, is we're in a very turbulent regulatory environment. And this is really a discussion about substance versus form, substance being kind of regulatory requirements, obligations. Let's leave that to the side. Let's focus on form, right? Because form is the challenge. And I would argue that form is not fit for purpose today. And because of that turbulent regulatory environment, there's just a huge demand. RegTech is trying to address it for automation, for regulatory intelligence, because the form in which regulators are producing content today is essentially unstructured, right? Largely PDFs, right? So what you've got is this kind of disconnected world where the production side is producing in a very unstructured form. The consumption side, applications, your business, your analytics, you need structured data. You can't work with a PDF. So the challenge here becomes, how do we take what is produced in PDF form? How do we create something that is in structured form so Will can use it in his business? And how do we do that in a way that is consistent in the structure of how we do that? Because if we're not consistent, it's a Tower of Babel. You address this question of interoperability. We won't get there. Nothing will be interoperability between what regulators produce and how it needs to be consumed without standardized structures, which leads us into the discussion of data standards. Okay, so I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Bob. That's a great segue. Actually, I'll throw that to you, Conan. What Bob mentioned the role of data. What do you think the role that data plays, and why is it important to work towards the regulatory data standardization, and what are opportunity costs if financial services firms do not do that?
Well, thanks, Will. I think data and standards for data are really essential to realize the promise of RegTech. And it's not just a challenge for RegTech alone, but it certainly is one of the conditions that we're looking for. And for me, it's all about effectiveness and getting to the outcomes that the public sector is looking for. As Bob said, if you're putting things out in PDF and unstructured formats, that's really not fit for purpose in a rapidly digitized economy. It also makes it really challenging for the financial sector and the RegTech partners to achieve those outcomes that the public sector are looking for. So whether you're looking at the volume of regulation that Bob hinted at, I think an old stat from 2019, so it's probably worse today, but the Bank of England sees 65 billion pieces of data annually from the companies that it oversees. And a Global Payments Network shared with me the other day that they're seeing 3 new privacy requirement updates a day across their global network. So to try to keep pace with this volume and to try to reach the outcomes that the public sector is looking for, it's really essential that they do their part and the public sector and private sector come together on data standards, the permission flow of data across sectors and borders. So all this is an essential piece of the map. And as I said, not just for RegTech, but for the industry in general. And it's important, again, if you want to see better outputs. So when we look just in the area of AML, KYC, counterterrorism financing, AML compliance costs just in the US, the industry, more than $50 billion a year. And Interpol estimates that less than 1% of criminal funds are intercepted today. And that's just not really acceptable. But to try to find a path forward, we need much better data sharing environments, much better permission flow of data. And as Bob said, a starting point, essential starting point is just to get those regulations and requirements in a readable format and in a common standard that the industry can plug into.
Fantastic, thank you. Alex, from a regulatory standpoint, how is FINOS thinking about this challenge? Sure. What are steps that you and FINOS is taking to help chart a course?
Sure. So the first thing is examining and studying the landscape. So we've been looking at the RegTech sector and the rising role of RegTech particularly post 2008 financial crisis with this explosion of regulations worldwide, and how that's been a challenge for firms globally to deal with. So I'll point at one thing publicly. In 2018, we launched a report called the RegTech report, Rise of RegTech, where we looked essentially at how newer emerging technologies have allowed the industry to modify their compliance programs to be more efficient from a cost perspective, more targeted, more effective, and more risk-based and forward-looking. And really 5 main areas that a lot of these RegTech tools are focused on in our analysis: monitoring and surveillance, solutions for ID, KYC, AML solutions, regulatory intelligence, reporting and risk management, and risk assessment of investors. Our study not only was limited to what's happening in the industry, but we looked at what we at FINRA could do, and our office, and particularly Office of Financial Innovation. So I'll highlight something. We're talking about taxonomies, RegTech, SupTech. In October 2022, we launched a SupTech tool of our own. It's called the Machine Readable Rulebook Initiative. So that initiative started about the same time that the RegTech report came out in 2018, late 2017. And essentially what we did was we created a regulatory taxonomy for the FINRA rulebook, essentially a hierarchical categorization of business, legal, regulatory terms to classify our rules and create a more efficient search function. And this is delivered in 2 ways. One, through we call it FIRST, the FINRA rulebook search tool. Of course, it's not a real regulatory tool unless it has an acronym, right? So FIRST, it's your first resource in accessing the FINRA rulebook, and that you can, as a user, go in and click through different boxes and filter your search down based on fact patterns to the rules that are applicable with those tags. In addition, when you actually access a rule, you will see that it's tagged on the right-hand side. If you go to our FINRA rulebooks, it's live right now, with a host of these regulatory tags. You can pull that content in through an API, map it to your firm's internal policies and procedures or your RegTech's policies and procedures. And on the regulatory intelligence side, or being able to monitor change, you can get updates from the FINRA API anytime something changes. So we are fully engaged with the public and the industry, folks like Bob, firms that we monitor and that are members of FINRA, to make this the best possible tool. And we invite any further comments if anyone wants to reach out.
That sounds quite interesting, Alex. Do you mind when you get a minute to put a link of that rulebook or API into the chat so our audiences can take a look if they want?
I'll do that.
Thank you. And then Conan, back to you. What opportunity do you see financial services firms and RegTechs together to work with regulators to help accelerate this particular topic?
Well, I think what Alex has just outlined they're doing at FINRA is something that we, would love to see more broadly, across the global markets. And it's a great example of what can be achieved when you have coordination and cooperation between the 2 sectors to achieve, as I said, much better outcomes, because that's at the end of the day what it's all about, is trying to meet those objectives. I think as AI rushes sort of into the marketplace, you had a cute introduction to our session here, but it is a very significant and serious development. But AI is really only powerful when it has that training data to be really effective, and making sure that AI is well informed. So in a regulatory and compliance setting, you can't get yes and no every other question. And Bob may give us a little tutorial about that later. But as AI is developed and trained, making sure that it has access to the best data and is well trained, I think is sort of essential. And so that's the opportunity that I see, is to create these tools that can really help the public sector and private sector achieve the shared objectives for regulation and compliance.
That's great. I'll make sure. Sounds like there's quite a bit of interest in terms of generative AI. So I'll make sure we have some time to talk about that particular topic in this session. But before that, Bob, back to you. So outside helping organizations with managing risk, obligations, and reduce cost, what do you think a more standardized data can help in terms of open new doors for RegTech solution providers?
Yeah. So I think I really, I sort of see that RegTech to some extent is kind of been a little bit boxed in the back office, right? It's been about compliance and workflow, reporting. I think the big opportunity here is actually to move it more into the front office. Like, how do you drive revenue? So, Will, you're in the asset management business, right? Now, if sustainability is a big topic in your world, right? Reporting on materiality of sustainability risk with counterparties or in your supply chain is a big issue of firms that your portfolio managers may actually invest in and take positions. I mean, if I can start to link an event through Newsflow with a company ID, and then I can map that into that company, the regulatory risks that emerge from, say, a sustainability event or ESG event, something in Newsflow. All of a sudden, I'm gaining visibility on a risk. I've got risk insight that I can trade on. I may change how I do business if it's in my supply chain. I may sell an asset or buy an asset. This is front office stuff. This isn't back office stuff. And where firms get excited, particularly in the environment we're in today, the economic environment, is tell me how I can drive my revenue. I get the cost saving thing. I get the error reduction. That's back office, right? But you start talking front office, this really gets a lot of people's attention. And so this is driving towards what I would call foot forward regulatory intelligence, right? That's the big opportunity. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of big players come into this market, because they're not thinking so much about compliance. They're thinking about analytics and regulatory intelligence, but they can't start. They can't get anywhere until they've got that data standardization that we've been talking about so far.
Yeah.
Pause, Will. I'm not sure whether that's a disagreement or that's an agreement.
No, I'm just trying to guess think about what you said. I really like the way you think about RegTech as a defensive side as well as the offensive side. I think that makes perfect sense. And I don't know whether Conan or Alex, whether you guys have any comment.
Yeah, I would just add that, I think Bob's point of getting it into the revenue stream and thinking about something rather than just cleaning up, after the fact is essential. I think also that experience, how do clients onboard? How do they interface? How do your staff interface with each other and with compliance, and trying to have those things a little more natural, automated, and in the flow of daily events, I think opens up a whole new set of opportunities, and again, will just be much more effective at achieving the better outcomes that we're looking for.
I'll just tie into that with a quick anecdote. When we launched, before launching this tool, we went through multiple iterations. We demoed it. We had a pilot. One of the things that stuck out to me when we demoed the machine readable rulebook we have 3,000 or so member firms at FINRA. The bulk of them are small firms. We demoed it to maybe an 8 or 10 person broker dealer in the United States, to the chief compliance officer, and they sat through the demo, they listened, and they said, this is going to save 25% of my workflow during the week, because people on the business side who otherwise would shoot an email or pick up the phone and call me are either going to figure out the answer themselves or streamline this question that they sent to me. That frees me up for more time to work on the policies and procedures, work on maybe launching new products and making sure they're compliant and things like that. So really, this is all about trying to make life easier and simpler for the industry, and as a result, more compliant, the industry as well, and making our lives better and investors' lives better.
And also, as we think about conduct and culture for employees, giving them those real-time tools and those interfaces, I think, again, helps transform the overall environment and, you know, the effectiveness of these systems. And some of the things that Alex had highlighted before of, you know, opening up APIs, improving that, you know, data quality structure, these are just sort of, you know, base table stakes and, you know, foundational requirements for the industry to be able to deliver on all of those compliance and enforcement things that the public sector or society in general is looking for the financial services industry to deliver. So whether it's, you know, the classic enforcement of AML, KYC, and CTF on behalf of society, or whether it is extending into new ESG goals and monitoring areas, you know, in order to be able to deliver that at the scale, the speed, and the effectiveness that society is looking for, we really need to create those foundations of that, you know, data standards and data availability to make the systems deliver at the speed and scale required.
That's fantastic. Let's touch on generative AI, as you know, all of you guys mentioned earlier. Maybe I'll start with Bob quickly. What do you think are the impact of this, you know, technology or group of technology to the RegTech industry in the coming months and years?
Look, if you're dealing with language, if you're dealing with text, and you're in the regulatory space, it's going to impact what you do, right? We've done a lot of work on this internally. We've trained models on it. Going back to Conan's point, and we talked about the yes/no. There's no question that training it on, look, we have a repository that has approaching 4 million documents from over 100 countries, detailed metadata attached to each document for over 2 million of those. And if you start to embed vectoring into training, you know, GPT models, and you ask questions that are quite specific and detailed that are within that universe of metadata, you get pretty darn good answers. The quality's high. It enables you to explore causal relationships or clustering that would be very challenging or expensive otherwise. So look, we're using it on the production side gently, like, right? Because you got to understand, how is it really producing? But I also think, you know, we're seeing definitely in how you would apply this in even, you know, compliance workflow, providing very rapid insight in terms of, you know, policy impact of a regulatory change. Boom. Now, firms that might have, you know, policy documentation internal, and I'd be interested to get Alex's view, Will, your view. How comfortable are you about loading your documents into, you know, a GPT, to OpenAI or Microsoft, whoever is offering that model? I think that's a barrier. And I think, you know, that will be a limitation. I see that actually is probably the biggest limitation, is the hesitancy, because you don't know where your documentation's, you don't know if it's training somebody else's model. You don't know. That's a huge issue.
I'll answer that question directly. As is now not comfortable uploading to OpenAI, for example. 24 hours ago, they announced the business plan, OpenAI business plan, that may change things. But that's a really good point. Also to Conan, what's your view on these?
Well, I think Bob has introduced sort of the essential issue here, and that is that the rapid, you know, surge forward in generative AI is pushing a lot of, you know, questions that have not been fully answered more broadly in society on the flow of data. You know, the Japanese, when they had the G20 presidency years ago, had proposed the Data Free Flow with Trust initiative. They've revived that with their G7 presidency, and the digital ministers will be discussing that and operationalizing it globally and looking at a framework in conversations in Japan this weekend. So it'll be interesting to see. But until we have those, you know, frameworks for the permission flow of data, you know, a framework for how data is used, we're sort of in a messy intermediate phase, and I think that could really hamper the development of AI. The power, of course, is we have great algorithms that you can set at sort of defined data sources now, even very large ones. But the power is that when you can combine that with the search for other data in other places, so final outcomes, legal decisions, broader sentiment in society, that's where this generative AI could be very interesting. But again, I think that society will struggle to get the right frameworks in place for governance and oversight of AI and the data that informs it. And I think the financial services industry has a lot to contribute to this broader debate in society, as one that has worked on the oversight of models of different types for decades, worried about privacy for decades, and had to handle the flow of data and permission flow of data. So broader debate, but one that will really shape the operating environment for AI and financial services as well.
Yeah, just before, I know you want to go to Alex, but I'll just say there is a business opportunity here, right? And so I think what we see is an opportunity for tokenization and to some extent sophisticated redaction in documentation that may be uploaded that would, so there's a whole privacy, I think there's a RegTech niche opportunity here that is not a small business that still enables the training to not be impacted. So there's this balance, squaring a circle between tokenization or redaction and having text substantial enough to be able to be trained on the model, the vectoring, etc. If you redact too much, you lose everything, right? So that's an opportunity area.
I completely agree. I want to give Alex a opportunity to comment on this. Alex.
Sure. So I'm mindful of time. I'll just kind of point to three things we're looking at. Two of them are linked: the risks and the realities. As Bob noted, if you work in text, if you work in regulation, this is coming for you. So if you're not at a minimum aware of it, you risk falling behind. On the risk side, right, as a regulator, we look at opportunities and potential risks, right? I hear talk about data leakages, right? What do you input in this AI tool? If it's sensitive information, that's a problem. Misinformation, right? If you go looking for something, if the AI tool is combing the web, gets incorrect information, it can, as you're saying, it says yes, it says no. On our side, we tried playing with it and looked for senior investor protection rules. It told us to look at FINRA Rule 2155. There is no FINRA Rule 2155. It made it up. So if you're relying on this, you could definitely go in the wrong direction with the hallucination. And then of course there's risk for potential risk by bad actors. But the reality is that, again, if you're potentially leaving a gap. Second area, improving search, right? What our taxonomy does is we embed metadata tags into these rules that may not actually, a concept that is not written in the text may appear as a tag. For example, if you look at a FINRA rule, it doesn't say the word conflict of interest anywhere in that rule. But anyone who knows what that rule is aware that there's a conflict of interest element in it. If you have this tag in there and you use an OpenAI tool, it may now be aware of that due to this tag. So it can improve search. And then lastly, we're considering all options as we explore further building out our FINRA rulebook search tool. Right now, it's applicable to 40 rules. We have 855 rules to go. Is a ChatGPT a possible tool to help us in our tagging process? Maybe. We're looking at it.
Thank you, Alex. It's never enough time to talk about AI, I must say. We're running out of time, but 30 seconds for each. What is the one thing that you like to challenge the audience to think about today as they sign off this event? We'll start with Bob.
It was mentioned at the top of this. It might have been Conan that said it. This is not going to get solved unless it's public-private. And I think that the industry has tried to solve this themselves. They just, for various dynamics, haven't been able to do that. Regulators are talking among themselves. It continues to be a fragmented effort. You've got to bring, look, we're trying to do that in some ways in the University at Cambridge to bring together and convene public-private but I'd like everybody just to think about, it's not going to get solved without a public-private coalition or initiative here.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
I would just say, just know that many financial services regulators, we're keen to not only understanding the impact of the latest technology trends on the industry, but how to best leverage it, for our own use. We are talking amongst ourselves with regulators to the best of our abilities, to organizations like IOSCO and GFIN, but we're certainly open to more of that as well.
Thank you. Conan, please wrap.
I'll make it a clean shoot. That public-private cooperation and focus on this together to solve these problems is absolutely essential, and required for the effectiveness that everybody wants us to achieve with this new technology. And it's really a lost opportunity if lack of that kind of coordination and standards and cooperation means that we're not able to leverage these new tools to get better reg and compliance outcomes.
Thank you so much. It's a great discussion. I think I'm certainly going to have a lot of things to think about tonight. I'm going to have trouble sleeping, I'm sure. Deborah, back to you.
Thanks very much, Will. And it's remiss of me not to say it is Will's birthday. Well, it was your birthday 1 minute ago. Happy birthday, Will. Thanks very much for doing this.
It's good to be
actually on your birthday at midnight. So I couldn't agree more. And I think in that session, we got round to that public-private coalition or collaboration. I agree. I think that is going to be super important. And then Bob also raised a good point, and that is a focus on revenue, and that's sometimes a bit missing in all the conversations that we have. And I applaud the work that Alex has been doing around, the classification of rules in a taxonomy. That's really fantastic. But I think we can all agree that it is, as Bob said, it is a turbulent regulatory environment. Lots of unstructured data. So we really do need some data standards. And I know Bob and I have talked about this at length. We live in hope, Bob. We live in hope. Will, thank you very much for convening tonight, and I wish you gentlemen a pleasant evening. And I'm going to now do a little bit of a wrap-up for everybody that we have online. Thank you very much. If you can still see the poll that is on your screen, please do fill that in. Important for us to have your feedback. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that I took out from all of the sessions tonight in no particular order. But I'll just reiterate some of these things, and we'll in fact take these into our discussion tomorrow at our face-to-face event, and then also consider how we might put these into the workflow for the RegTech Association going forward. But one of the things that Anna Wallace said, she pointed out that financial inclusion is actually very fragile, and I really like the way that she put that. And then she also talked about the challenges of moving regulators from experimentation into real life. The customers are now in the driver's seat. I heard a regulator talk about ChatGPT for supervision, and we heard that a couple of times this evening. I think we saw the world's first SupTech poster, so well done to ECB. Down to Drew Propson talked about the talent scarcity risk. And in our final panel, the need for data standards with more and more unstructured data flowing around the system, that this is something that we're really going to need. As I mentioned earlier, we actually can't do what we do without the support of the wider ecosystem, and many of the people that were on the call tonight, both as attendees and speakers, we can't do it without them. And non-profit associations like ours play such an important role in driving best practice, providing key data and information on industry developments, and bringing our stakeholders together to unpack the opportunity that is RegTech. If you're online and you aren't a member yet, we would love to see you as a supporter. We do have a global mandate, and if we lean in together, we can truly support RegTech innovation
that not only benefits innovative companies, but regulators, institutions, government, and ultimately consumers. So we end tonight where we started, and that's talking about our people. I'd like to acknowledge the board and the advisory committee of the RegTech Association for their unwavering support. Also to my team who were mentioned earlier this evening, Alison and Hong, without whom we could not have such high quality events. And of course to our valued members who are online, of course, and our sponsors. And for those of you in Sydney, we'll see you tomorrow at our face-to-face event. And we're also looking forward to seeing you in the UK and Europe in person in June. Details on those events can be found on the app. So thank you very much once again for being online with us. Good day and good evening to you. Thank you.